Welcome to Republican Roundtable. I'm your host, Max Reimer. We are in a critical election year here in 2022. There's numerous races which get a bunch of headlines, but did you know the legislative races typically outperform the top of the ticket across the state? They are important in our local communities and to the everyday voter. Today in studio, we are very excited to have three guests who are running in local legislative races. We have Thomas Knecht, Marla Helseth, and Ryan, tell me what the last name. Wiskerchen. I didn't want to mess that up. Thank you all for joining us today on the Republican Roundtable, and thank you for stepping up for office.
Thanks for having us.
Thomas, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit maybe about your district and your background and why you've decided to run for office.
Yeah, absolutely. A bit about me. I grew up on a small farm. My family raised beef and pork. At the same time, my dad had a small concrete foundation company. And between the farm and the construction, I kind of realized from a young age that I want to get my rear end. I've been the old man my whole life, so I better stick to the books. So I ended up going to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And then my freshman year was the same year as the 2007-2008 financial crisis. And for me, everybody I knew growing up was involved in the housing industry, and that sparked my interest to get involved in politics, study political science and economics. I kind of kept, I ended up going on getting a master's in economic history, going to law school, and having a legal career. I always kept one foot in the political world. And now with everything going on in our state and around the country, I figured this was the best way I can make the most difference.
And tell us about a little bit where your district is, the geographical area of it.
Yeah, so I'm running in Eden Prairie. It's effectively the southern 2/3 of Eden Prairie. It follows, Highway 5 in the west. And then when 5 merges with 212, it follows 212 up to the northeast part of town in Eden Prairie. So it was a long-time Republican seat. And then in 2018, it flipped to the DFL by about 241 votes. And now we're going to get it back here in 2022.
Very good, very good. Marla, tell us a little bit about your seat, your background, why you're running, why you've decided to enter this crazy arena.
Yeah, I'm running for a similar district to Thomas here, so we're kind of running together. I'm running for the state Senate seat in SD 49, which is considered southern Minnetonka, so everything south of Highway 7 and all of Eden Prairie. Running for that state Senate seat. Just a little bit background about me. I'm originally from suburban Illinois. Raised by my single mom, me and my 5 siblings, moved to Minnesota when I was young. Right out of high school, because there wasn't money for college, I went right into the workforce and went right into modeling, doing some modeling, administrative assistant for some downtown corporations, and also restaurant management. But then about almost 19, 20 years ago, we moved to the Minnetonka, Eden Prairie area. So we've been here for, this summer it'll be 20 years, married to Paul, have 2 kids. They're teenagers, and they attend school in the area.
Oh, God bless
in
you.
Eden Prairie.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a challenge, but it's a fun season of life. And they attend school in the area, and when they were first in school, I was staying at home with them. But I did end up, as they got more into school, I ended up being a substitute teacher and a staff aide at the school, and I loved that, just teaching in school. But then I decided to run for office after, I followed politics over the years. Just me and my husband were kind of following it in the news. But I think the COVID policies and the mask mandates, that sort of thing, kind of got me more interested in what is the law, in how much of responsibility do we have to, follow the emergency powers that our governor was handing down. So that got me kind of interested, and then I decided to run after talking to my husband, and here we are. Yeah.
Very good. Thanks for stepping up.
Yeah, thank you.
Ryan, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your background, why you've decided to enter kind of the arena of politics, and your district. We'd like to know about your district.
Right. Well, I'll try to just talk a little. I like to talk,
Yeah,
so
please do.
I'll limit myself. So, Ryan Wiskerchen. I grew up in South Minneapolis. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 18 because I thought we had the best public transportation in the world. And when my parents moved me out to the suburbs after I graduated high school, my first question was, where are the bus stops? I didn't understand life out in the burbs. But I went to college in Iowa. I met my wife there, and I won the coin toss, so she moved back to Minnesota. And we were living in Bloomington, but we moved to Richfield just over 2 years ago, right before everything started getting shut down. We bought a house. So we had people helping us move 3 days before everyone retreated into their bubbles. And I work at the legislature. I work in St. Paul for State Representatives Greg Bowe and Matt Bliss. And it was the COVID policies, like Marla said, that kind of got me interested, but seeing it from the legislative side and seeing how many people were contacting our offices and looking for help with unemployment insurance or helping keep their small business afloat. And a lot of them were just so grateful to have someone answer the phone after being on hold with these agencies for hours and days and not getting any information. And that's what I look at, what a legislator should do, and they should be a servant to the people. They should be an advocate for them. And I'm running because I want to be an advocate for the people in Richfield.
Thank you. You know, all three of you represent what every Republican politician and consultant would say is the key to winning Minnesota. You all represent suburban Minnesota. I'm wondering, because we're all curious at this point, how do we unlock that key? How do we get the suburbs back? Thomas, you even mentioned your district for 50 plus years may have been a Republican district. What issues matter to people right now in the district, and how are we connecting to the heart of those issues? Marla, I'd like to start with you. What are you hearing from constituents?
Well, I am hearing three different things at least. When I've talked to my neighbors, and I have a habit of talking to the people in Cub Foods. I go to Cub Foods a lot in Eden Prairie.
Very important.
Yeah.
Very important
Right.
think tank, if you
Right,
will. Cub
right,
Foods,
exactly.
yeah.
I'm hearing that public safety is an issue, and public safety, but primarily, I think one way to reach our district is through getting in touch with some of the suburban moms who I've seen in some of the things I've read care a lot about government spending, wasteful government spending. So, which is a factor of inflation and also, raising the cost for basic gas and groceries. So, it is public safety, but also government spending, and that's one reason I'm running, is to try and hold that back and trying to get in the legislature to help work with others on stemming the tide of wasteful government spending.
Thomas, are you hearing something similar?
Yeah, the two main issues overwhelmingly are public safety and the economy, mainly inflation. Talking to voters, even in Eden Prairie, it may not have the same sort of high-profile incidents we see in some of these other communities in terms of crime. But voters, they're having groups of people going down their driveway, trying to get into cars, rifling through the cars, trying to get phones, or they get in the car, hitting the garage door opener and getting into the garages and stuff. One woman even had her car stolen from the driveway. Even though it's not in the news, it's still happening, and folks just don't feel safe.
Ryan, your district touches the urban core a little bit more,
Yes.
Than your average suburb. I'm wondering, with the intensity of crime, even in Richfield compared to Eden Prairie, and it's expanding obviously into the suburbs, do you feel like that's kind of issue number one in Richfield right now, or are there other things that people are talking about?
That's issue number one. And the other issues are coming close, but when you have a shooting outside of the high school, when you have just incidents of crime, and what's more, it's not just the crimes themselves, it's the missed opportunities, the choices that we make to not go outside, to not meet our neighbors, to not go into the city and spend money there, to not see a show. Our communities are getting hurt by crime because that trust is eroding, and that's something that I don't think comes up a lot. It's heartbreaking to look at the number of victims of these crimes, but the unspoken victims are the people who aren't meeting their neighbors, aren't making the connections, and that's a crime as well.
Yeah, I think the issues are critical. I'm always curious because I don't think we have a playbook just yet about how we win, how we connect with people in the suburbs. I think it was such a quick pulling out of the rug from underneath, what used to be traditional Republican districts, that I think we're all kind of shell-shocked, even in the last two to 4 years, why people aren't coming home. Thomas, I'm curious, how do you think that, in your race specifically, how do you win?
Yeah, I think politics in general is all about building relationships. Mainly that's door knocking and everything else, we raise money for is going to building that relationship through other means, whether through digital media, lawn signs, mailers, however that may be. And it's really speaking to the voters' interests. As I said, my district was Republican for decades until 2018. But unfortunately, so it's still in these swing districts. Unfortunately, the current incumbent votes with the far left wing of the DFL. She's not representing the interests of the district. So you just need to communicate to voters, I'm going to represent you in St. Paul, not a partisan agenda. I'm going to be an independent voice for Eden Prairie as opposed to whatever my party or whatever I believe is the pet project. So.
Yeah.
Marla, you feel something similar to that?
I do.
How are you winning that district?
Yeah, I think all three of us have our reasons that we're running. But I think essentially, and a big factor of running and winning is talking to the people in our district and hearing from them, hearing what the issues are. So yes, we want to represent our new perspective in government, but it's really important to be an actual representative. We need to hear from the people. And so door knocking, just talking to your grocer, your gas station attendant, whomever, your neighbors. And I intend to do a lot of that and have already done that, previously. So I think that relationships is a big way to win.
Something similar to that?
Yeah,
Richfield as well?
I would just add most voters, they're not ideologues.
Right.
They aren't going to be looking for the party line, they're looking for what affects them and their families. And when you have people who take them for granted from the Republican Party or the DFL, that's when they start looking for change. When they feel their voices aren't being heard, they're not being advocated for, they're just a chip on the board. They're not people with real needs.
I've had someone email me and ask me, they expressed their frustration in the beginning of the email that I'm frustrated with the Democrats, I'm frustrated with the Republicans. What can you do to bring the two sides together? So I think a lot of people maybe are not too beholden to the labels. They would rather just, like you said, find out what we can do to help them in their daily lives.
And especially every time you go to the gas station, prices are going up. We're going to the grocery
Right,
store, milk,
right.
eggs are all going up and up and up.
Yeah.
And how are we going to make people? How are we going to, bring safety back to the communities? What are we going to do to combat this inflation? And that goes back. You mentioned earlier government spending. The San Francisco Federal Reserve just came out with a study saying both federal and state spending is driving inflation in America across the board. And then here in Minnesota we have a record budget surplus of $9.2 billion. And then I saw it in the news today that they're trying to advocate for another $4 billion in spending. We don't need that. That's going to contribute. It's pouring gas onto the fire. We don't need new spending or new pet projects. If anything, we need to reduce one of the highest tax burdens in the nation.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, and I think it's something that Republicans should and could capitalize on, is the fact that, hey, our government spends money too, and that government spending leads to increased inflation. This idea that it's just some kind of Federal Reserve policy or federal government issue is a misnomer. You're right, we do have a record surplus. Ryan, for you in particular, what I find interesting is I used to be a Bloomington resident. We were on the border of Richfield, and I'm sure we all kind of experience the same thing, whereas there is this stigma about voting Republican.
Yep.
We're talking a lot about relationships. We're talking about building an independent brand. We're not necessarily talking about the platform. We're not necessarily talking about the policy. I'm wondering what you do to kind of overcome the stigma in the metro, which is associated, at least for the last 4 years, with Republicans.
Yeah, it's a great question. And first thing I tell people is that it is going to be an uphill race. And that means that I'm going to meet people, I'm going to knock doors, I'm going to talk with people. I'm not going to take any votes for granted because I'm going to have to work that much harder. This isn't a safe seat. This isn't, a candidate in name only. I actually want to represent the people of Richfield. And because it's this close to the urban core, it's not a race that's getting a lot of attention from outside groups as, oh, this is a seat we can flip. This is a seat that, we can just put a little nudge here, a nudge there. I can build a more independent brand because there's not 20 consultants trying to tell me what to do. So when it comes to government spending, well, how much of that spending is actually going to help people? How much of it is going towards the Feeding Our Future scandal? how much of it is going to empty buildings instead of feeding children who actually need meals? If you want to look at cutting government spending, make sure the spending is going to where it's needed and not to the pockets of nonprofits and grifters who are just taking the money and running. So there's definitely a stigma, and that's part of the challenge, and I love a good challenge. So.
Yeah. Marla, I mean, specifically for you, in your district, in the suburban district, which has been a long-time Republican, it seems like the brand is taking kind of a little bit of a turn, you know, to more of a populist and, for lack of a better term, outstate brand. You know, I'm wondering what you're doing right now, especially as a woman running for office, especially as a woman of color running for office. How are you kind of differentiating yourself amongst this constituency?
Yeah, I think those few things, the fact that I'm Black and a woman, just kind of naturally distinguishes me from my opponent. But it also does broaden, I hope it really broadens the face of the Republican Party. We really do need, and we already have, I think there's been a good narrative out there that the Republican Party is all white males. But there's been a lot of Black conservatives in the Republican Party, as we all know. And so that is part of the reason I'm running, and part of my platform is the fact that I do bring a different perspective to the Republican Party and to this district. The district itself is not it's not primarily white, and it has a mixture of cultural communities, Indian, Spanish-speaking.
Quite a large Indian population in Eden Prairie.
Yep, and I want to represent everybody, so I've been talking to them, meeting with those communities, talking to people in those communities. And so I think that's one way I really differentiate myself from the Democrat Party and from my opponent is I come from a different background, a different perspective that I bring. Being a woman, there aren't many women in the Senate, and there aren't any Black women.
Yeah.
So I am bringing a lot of different things, but I'm also bringing, race is kind of low on the list for me. It's not, it's a factor, but it's not the reason I'm running. But it does help, it does bring a different perspective, and I hope I can add that to the legislature, because true diversity, to me, is more than just skin color.
Absolutely.
Different perspective, different backgrounds. I think that will help, yeah.
Thomas, do you feel like the Republican brand is something to overcome in Eden Prairie? Or there are things that we lean into? I'm curious, what's the balance there?
I think we've seen this going back decades, right? Parties, back in the day, as you said, the Republicans were dominant in the suburbs. Greater Minnesota was very DFL strong, and that's flipped. I think in today's world, the suburbs more, are the swing districts. So on that end, it really depends more about the individual candidates and the campaigns. And for me, I'm going to talk about my life story. As I said, I grew up on the farm. My dad did construction. My mom, she was a housekeeper. Then she stayed home with me and my brother. And when I was in high school, she went back to work as a cook, either in deli or local schools. For me, it's just saying, hey, even though I might be the white male, for example, I have come from more of a working class background. I can relate to you. And, especially talking about education is probably the third most important issue that's going on right now. I think for me, getting an education and pursuing higher education allowed me to transform my life. And I want to make sure relate that and saying, hey, it's important that we ensure educational excellence, whether it be in Eden Prairie and across the state of Minnesota. And I can speak to that from my own personal experience.
Let's talk about education for a little bit. You brought up the issue. I'm interested in the metro, obviously in Richfield. Those schools have gone through some pretty significant controversy, I would say, in the last year here. You guys are near Edina, which seems to be ground zero for some of the race-based, controversy that's happening in education, at least in the suburbs. How are you all talking about education in a way that's compelling to moms and families, but isn't alienating or isn't rhetorically explosive to people who are paying attention to the national trends? We're not Florida, we're not Texas, we're not Alabama. How are you guys talking about education? What needs to happen in this state, Marla?
Well, I've done a few meet and greets where I'm just meeting people in the community, and it's important to me that I hear from parents who have their kids in the schools in Eden Prairie. Eden Prairie is unique because it has all of the schools in Eden Prairie are Eden Prairie schools. We do have open enrollment, but almost all of the students in Eden Prairie go to Eden Prairie schools. So there's a really strong community there, which is good. And the parents I've talked to at these meet and greets, they have said that they're actually very happy with the public school. And I think that's fine. I think that's great. And I think if you want your students in public schools and they're doing well, that's great. As long as we hold to high academic standards, we're not lowering any standards for any particular group. Just keep teaching, the good things that they're supposed to be teaching. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, I do think there are parents out there who want to have more of a choice, who want to have an educational choice of where to put their students. My son attends a private school in Eden Prairie, and it's a really small school, and I was privileged to be able to teach all of the subjects there. I love the school, love the size of it and the students, and really it really built kind of a really nice community. Mm-hmm. But the reason I chose that, and I'm glad I had the choice to do that, is because I wanted a particular education for my son. I think we need more of that in Eden Prairie. I think we do need more educational choice for parents, because that is what I've heard from some other parents. Mm-hmm. They've asked me, some of the delegates I've had to call on the phone have asked me, what other options are there, and what do you think about creating funding that will follow the student to the school that the parents want the kids to go to. Mm-hmm. So I think both can happen. I think if we work hard, we can have a community where the parents are pleased with the education that their students are getting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think within Eden Prairie, you guys have really been blessed with a good school board and good people on it.
It's a very good school board.
Ryan, I think it's a little different in Richfield, right?
A little bit.
How are you talking about education?
Well, I'll start off by saying I'm the proud product of Minneapolis Public Schools, and I've turned out all right. I have a lot of teachers in my family. My wife is a teacher, and I run anything education related past her to get her perspective as a teacher and as the mom of 2 little boys. They haven't started school yet, but looking with an eye to the future, what will the future hold for them? And it's been interesting because there's a lot of excitement among parents, a lot of what parents would like to see, but also from teachers. And I think the biggest thing that can unite these groups, there's so much about pitting teachers and parents against each other, when what we all want is what's best for the students, what's best for the families. It's local control. It's giving the local community, the parents and the teachers, a greater say in how the schools are operated. What I hear from teachers is that a lot is being handed down from St. Paul, and there's only so many hours in the day. There are new mandates for what they have to teach and how they have to teach it, and it's exhausting them. And the education funding that we're seeing isn't going to the student formula. It's usually not going to improve teacher salaries or to reduce class sizes. It's bloating in administration. Mm-hmm. And that's where teachers and parents, sometimes it can be easy to talk past each other, but I think there's a real interest in returning that control of education to our communities, because we know our kids better than anyone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thomas, part of elections are, running a positive campaign, running a campaign with vision, running on the issues, but you all have, to my understanding, incumbent opponents. Some of this is about contrast. I'm wondering how you're contrasting yourself with your opponent right now.
My opponent, like I said, she was elected in 2018, what was historically a Republican district, but she's voted with the far left of the DFL. She's a rubber stamp for the far left agenda and then the House leadership down there. And that's not what Eden Prairie, it's not a reflection of the district. Eden Prairie needs an independent voice for Eden Prairie residents and not representing partisan interests, and that's what I'll bring in contrast to the incumbent.
Mm-hmm. Marla, something similar to that, or how
similar,
are you?
Yeah, I would think that. I think the same thing, because I would be in Thomas's district. We live in southern Eden Prairie. Mm-hmm. But my opponent also, I differentiate myself because I'm not tied to any special interest. Just running as a mom, wife. There is no particular special interest like the teacher unions to fund my campaign. Mm-hmm. So there's that, and also, like I said before, I bring a different perspective. I'm very different than my opponent as far as how I view government and how government should spend money. And also, I've noticed a few bills that my opponent has put forth and put money toward, lots of money toward, that I personally don't think are worth. I don't think it's where we should be spending our money.
Sure.
So I would like to address that. I think I would have a different perspective on where money should be spent. And yeah.
Ryan, something similar to that, or?
Being in St. Paul in the legislature, I get kind of a first row seat to votes, and it's very illuminating.
You've seen some doozies.
Yes.
Yes, and some of the bills that they put together in St. Paul are really eye openers.
You were nodding when I was.
Yes, I was.
I could name a few.
Yes,
That's
yes,
right.
I could.
But this goes back to that reaching out to people, not taking people for granted. But I met with a private sector union organizer in my district, and I talked with him, and he asked me who I was running for. I named my opponent, and he said, "I've never met him." And here, the unions, the Democrat, Farmer, Labor Party, and he hadn't met this union activist who was very prominent, has met President Biden, has been around for years, and that just struck me as you need to show up, for your constituents.
Why do you think that was? Do you think they just assume it's a safe seat so they don't really have to go out there, or?
That's what I think it is. I think it's taking people for granted, and that's why Republicans, I think, lost the suburbs, and I think that's why this is the year to reverse that trend, because now we're actively campaigning in the suburbs. We're listening to what the people want. We're understanding how things have changed, how they've become more diverse, how they've, they're not the suburbs of Levittown in the 1950s. They're the suburbs of a new generation, and we are the candidates of a new generation.
Just for you all, and I want to
Right.
stay here, Ryan, with the last minute or so here. Just tell us a little bit about, how people can get involved with your campaign and where they can learn more about you.
Yes, so we have a website, Ryan for MN, and that's FOR, not the number 4, .com, and that has links to our social media page. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, there's a contact form, and there's really that contact form. I'd love to hear from anyone who has something to say about the direction in Richfield and how we should be moving forward together.
Marla, how can people get to know more about you and your candidacy?
Yeah, I have a similar website name, so it's Marla for Minnesota with the word for FOR.com, and I'm also on social media. And I too would love to hear from anyone. I do get a lot of emails, like I said before, and I try to answer as many as I can. So I love hearing from people. I would love the support of the constituents in Eden Prairie and southern Minnetonka. The campaign's going well. I have a good team of people to help me. I have a team of people waiting to go door knocking with me, which I think is great.
So important.
Some parents from the schools, and I'm looking forward to talking to as many people as possible.
Thomas, last 30 seconds is yours. How can people get to know more about you and your campaign, and
Yeah.
how can they help?
Just go to the website, Knecht, KNECHTFORMN.com. Fill out the volunteer form, and I'd love to hear from you. So.
Did you all coordinate the way to spell your website and the
I don't
domain
think so.
to use?
No, because she does Minnesota and I'm MN, and I think
And he's MN too.
so-
Yeah.
You all, thank you so much for
Thank
joining the
you very
Republican
much.
Roundtable. Thanks for stepping up, and God bless you. Good luck,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully we can all get involved in this thing and win in November.
Yes,
Absolutely.
let's
Thanks.
win.
Right.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Max.
you.
This has been the Republican Roundtable. I'm your host, Max Reimer. Until next time.